Anthony, John, today we are talking about traditional retirement versus die with zero versus Elon Musk's money's not going to matter. We're all going to be super wealthy and be able to buy whatever we want. So if you think about what we're told as Americans, right, we have this system and we're told to save 1.5 million for retirement. I don't think that's probably enough for the average person, but that's kind of traditional advice. 5 million. The average person in America has 2K. So not what they need. And I guess the question we're asking today is, does retirement savings become obsolete in the future? And let's jump right into, you guys have both worked with financial planners for years. What is the advice, traditional advice? Let's baseline there that they tell you, here's what you should do to save for retirement. So what have people you've worked with told you?
Well, for
Yeah.
me, it's pretty straightforward. What is your burn rate for the lifestyle you want to lead? What are the number of income producing assets you have? And using 3, 5, 7% return on those assets every year, is that enough to sustain the lifestyle that you want? So that's the way it comes out. And obviously, $255,000 times 5% is not going to generate much income in today's world. So it's clear that the average person doesn't have a chance of retirement unless your pie in the sky Elon Musk thing comes true next week. So that was the traditional approach, and that gets back to something we talked about a lot of episodes ago: setting a financial finish line. Accumulating enough assets so that with those various returns, you could sustain a consistent lifestyle.
John, what have you been told that you would add to that?
Yeah, I had a really interesting set of conversations in my 30s where I believed save 10 to 20% of your income. Like that was the deal. And I had an environment of people around me who really believed that. And it became like a manifesto. And what I realized after going through to therapy for other things that were unrelated, that money became to be a thing that I tried to rely on for security that wasn't actually causing the kind of security I wanted. And I learned that like what you save is a preference. Like it's not it's not a rule, it's a preference. And to Anthony's point, like getting clear about what you want later in life and then setting yourself up for that. But then there's a lot of variables. And what I find is
Yeah.
that people tend to be not conservative enough and totally hands off, which I find to be problematic for people. Or I find them to be so hyper conservative that they're trying to kick a 2,000-yard field goal on a 100-yard field. And it's like, it's not even possible. And so what I work with, friends and clients on is like, what's the reality? And with my financial planner, it's like, let's use numbers that are not overly conservative or overly liberal. Let's use numbers that are real. And that means like for my life, I believe that Social Security is going to exist. We can argue about that all you want, but so I back that number out of what I need. And then we have other numbers, and I look at inflation and what the growth is going to look like. And so I think it's just I think the 4% number in terms of return on investment is probably a little too conservative in my world. For some people, it's probably the right number. I think, looking for an 8% return in retirement is probably too aggressive in most people's worlds in retirement. And I think people retiring and never earning money ever again, for some people, that's exactly the path they're going to be on. But for lots of people like me, like I'm not going to stop earning money until way after I'm 70 years old because I enjoy the work that I do to earn money. So I think all those things matter. And so I think the problem I find is that people get way too conservative or way too aggressive, and they don't have someone who's a good sounding board to bounce that stuff off of.
So just to baseline for the audience, what are some of the assumptions that they tend to make? So the yield you're talking about, right?
Yep.
4% is what you're
Yep.
talking. That's kind of traditional, like the money that you can set aside and circling all the way back to what Anthony said, the 255 whether it's 4, 5, 7, is not going to be enough for somebody to survive, right? So that's one of the assumptions that they make. Another one is that 30 years retirement. Is that what they kind of plan for in your experience?
I think most people that I talk to plan to live on the interest alone, and then they plan to die with the entire corpus intact without understanding what that means. Or they have the 4% and they don't think about the inflation. Like I say, those are some of the assumptions that people need to play with. And like I'm capable of running all that math inside of my spreadsheet, but I find it way easier to hand it to my financial planner, who's a competent financial planner, and for them to ask me really smart questions about that stuff. And that way I can get like I can look at different scenarios very easily without having to run that spreadsheet myself.
Yeah, and where I was going with the 30 years though is that the same. I think all three of us on this call to varying degrees expect to live longer, right? And so maybe planning for 30 years, maybe it needs to be 40 or 50 or 100. I think that's another
Yeah.
variable that's thrown into the
If
mix.
it depends when you want to stop working. If you're going to stop working at 65 or 75 or 85 or Charlie Munger didn't stop working at 99. Buffett's still working into his 90s and he's so I think it's partly about the money part of it. There's a whole different conversation we're not going to have today which is about finding what you love that where you can earn income. And so but there are people that work in jobs, manual labor in particular, that I think they've got to be thoughtful in a different way and that's okay too.
Yeah, the 255 really is shocking to me, and I don't know where that statistics come from. I don't know if that's a includes a 20-year-old who's just starting out, um, and isn't opting into a 401k or any kind of saving strategy. I certainly a mistake made by a lot of people that are not in higher paying things. I mean, we all know, and I think these rules have changed, but when there was an opt-in for 401ks, even at big companies, the percentage of people in the lower income brackets that opted in was excruciatingly low. Very frustrating, to the point where it used to cause difficulties for higher paying executives in those companies. They had to give money back because there was an imbalance. I think they've changed those rules. Someone could fact check me on that, but now you're automatically opted in to your 401k at a big company and you can then opt out, which I think is a good thing. So but it is kind of frightening to think about, you know, an aging population that we have, and the average is 255. Let's say you double that or triple it, for people in their 50s and beyond. That's still they're still going to be relying on Social Security to have probably a lifestyle that they're familiar with, which is kind of it kind of shakes my foundation a little bit.
So real quick, NerdWallet says 313 is the number for retirement savings for Americans aged 45 to 54. I'm interested to know if that's each individual or if that's per household, because if that's per individual, that's materially different than per household. That person would have $1.25 million at age 63 at like an 8 or 9% return on average. Inflation adjusted would be reasonable, and that puts them at like $50,000, $60,000 a year in income plus 30 or $40,000 a year. So that would put someone in a pretty good place if they're smart about it. Maybe a little tight, but not maybe as horrific as it sounds on the face of it.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean
I
It's
they have to
70.
work.
It's 2.5 million at age 72, by the way.
Yeah. So now you're starting to get to a place where maybe you can, and it comes down to, do you want to maintain the same lifestyle that you had? That's the other thing. Depending on your health, your family situation, and so forth, your desire to travel, all those things, you know, come into play. So keep us going, Randy.
all right. Well, let's move to the next section. John, you're a big fan of the book Die with Zero, right? Bill Perkins. You want to talk through like your thinking and why does that speak to you?
Look, I think it was a really fresh way of looking at retirement. And it goes back to that corpus of money you have when you die and how much do you want to have. And so, one of the big things that I personally took away from the book was like, If you're working for the benefit of money, you don't love your work, you don't love what you do, then why work any extra minute for any dollar that you don't want to spend or deliberately leave for whoever you're going to leave money for when you pass away? So if you accidentally had an extra $100,000 or $1 million that you didn't wish you'd worked for, then all that time you spent working towards something you didn't enjoy doing, you gave up your time, which is more valuable than money for most people as they age. And so that really hit me. It's like, okay, well, so that was one concept. The second concept was like, enjoy the things you can enjoy when you're the right age to enjoy them. Like, if I wanted to go ice climbing, which I did once in my 20s, uh, that would be the right time to do it because ice climbing is, you know, more difficult in your 80s, not impossible, but more difficult in your 80s than it is in your 20s. I happened to try ice climbing once. I didn't enjoy it enough to do it again, but I think it's a great example. So, like, there's things I love doing. Scuba diving, easier to do when aging, right? My family's taking an adventure trip this year to Antarctica, and we're doing that because we think the timing is right for the ecology of the world, for the timing of our kids in terms of their ability to get away with us. Like, there's a number of things we're doing. We want to do the things in the decades when we can do them physically and mentally, and spend the money now. Another good example is my wife. We're having a 50th birthday party for her that's materially expensive in my world for a couple of people and her to do something really special and meaningful. It's just a handful of people, but I can't take it with me. And it's not like not spending the money wouldn't move my needle. And so I think I felt differently about that in my 20s and 30s because I was building. But now I'm like, hey, what I want to be very deliberate about how I spend money with my kids, how, I help them get ahead. So that's the kind of some of the very simplified die with zero concepts. If anyone's interested in a different way of thinking about it, I think Perkins' book is a great book to read, if for nothing else, to see the world in a different point of view.
So, is a good summary traditional is what you said earlier that you die with the whole principal left, and that goes, into your people's inheritance. And this, the concept is you die with nothing. I mean, first, I have a follow up question. That's the concept, right?
It's certainly the thing he wants someone to consider so that you maximize your time. So you're optimizing for your time, not for your money.
Okay. So, how does inheritance, what does he say about inheritance, or how do you think about the inheritance thing?
The book talks about using money for the inheritance and pushing it out to the kids when it has the highest value to them, the highest utility. And so, I don't remember the exact, you know, things that happened in the book, but I think about like where did I have the most struggles from, the time I was 18 to today, 53, and where did my mom help me kind of, inject a little bit of capital to make a massive amount of difference. And so that's how I think about it with my kids now. It's like, where can I inject capital into their lives to both encourage them to be functional, healthy adults so I'm not enabling bad behavior, and also help them catalyze success for them in a way that's healthy.
Anthony, I know you had some questions on this. Have they been answered, or do you have other questions?
It's easy to read a book and say that's a great idea, but it conflicts with certainly the I'm trying to think of the best word, but kind of the mindset that we have had all of our lives, which is to be providers, right? To provide a safe haven for people, provide housing and whatnot. So as I sit here today, I envision that corpus, if you will, of money that exists in various places. That's really, I view it as a security blanket for my kids and my grandkids for the unknowns that could befall them down the road. It would be great to shuffle a couple of $100,000 here and there to them to go start a business or whatever. And if someone had an idea for a business, I probably would do that. But I don't know that moving the money over there so that they could save it makes a lot of sense. I don't know what those things would be that a chunk of money sent to them would change. Certainly, if someone had a health issue or someone lost a job and they were in financial straits, it'd be a different situation. But right now, that isn't the case. So for me, building that nest egg so that and have enough to live on in the lifestyle that I'm comfortable with without, in my case, any real constraints seems like a prudent thing to do, as opposed to blowing the cash, if you will, on, private jets and things like that. It'd be great. I'd love to fly private all the time, but is that really
But
necessary?
Anthony, you do. I mean, I think you and I share a lot of similarities in this because you believe in experiences for your family, and so and you have reasonable, like not blow it out, private jet experiences, but not to say that's wrong. By the way, I know people who have that kind of income and wealth where that makes a lot of sense. But for me, I'm not there, and so I think reasonable, kind of appropriate economically, experiences, whether it's a family vacation together or a day out, that's one thing. I think maybe helping your children have enough money to start having the habit of investing. It's like, I
Mhm.
think, giving a little bit of money so people can start to watch how different investments work is helpful potentially. I think there's going to be a time where I'm certainly open to helping the children put a down payment on a house, maybe would be something I would consider.
Yeah.
And then one thing that I think through is like, taking a 529, maxing it out and converting it to a Roth IRA is something you can do right now. And that then gives them a nice head start on retirement savings in their early 20s where they could have, seven figures put away on top of Social Security, whether you believe that or not. So those are all things that can be done in the short term that are, at least worth considering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beware of the kitty tax, by the way, when you convert that 529. But anyway, I agree. I agree with all that, and I think if you look back, I think most people look back and would say, "Why did I spend all that money on that thing?" Thing being the boat, the motorcycle, the whatever. The old adage of "He who dies with the most things wins." It's kind of a fool's errand, if you will, and I certainly suffered from that early on. So yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna think this through a little bit more now that we're having the conversation, but I'm just kind of stuck in the old way
Well,
of doing things.
again, that's what we want, right? We want people to take this information. We're going to talk about a few different viewpoints and then decide which is best for them. But, on one of the early episodes when we were talking about abundance, I mentioned my grandma. And my grandma, when she was already retired, inherited a fair amount of money from her brother that nobody knew had any money. They all thought he was broke because they went to his house when a window would break, he would board it up instead of fixing the window. But he saved and saved and saved, and then the opposite of die was zero. He never enjoyed any of that. His sisters ended up each getting a nice chunk. I mean, it was seven figures back when $1 million was worth a lot more than it is now. And my grandma gave my mom and each of her brothers and sisters started getting $500 a month. She took most of the money and bought stuff at the church. She bought a new organ, she bought a new stove, she bought stained glass windows, whatever they needed. It was small town Minnesota. She gave a lot of it away and spent it on some other stuff like that. But $500 a month, which, in today's dollars is $1,000 a month plus to each of her kids until she died. Well, at the end of her life, she was in a facility that was for Alzheimer's, dementia, etc. And they basically took everything she didn't give away. They took all of it. In fact, at her funeral, I got a envelope of cash that had $600 or $800 in it. They'd found the cash, and my uncle had to call me back like 2 months later saying the state wanted. Somehow they knew about that cash. So I actually had to give it, we each had to give it back. Right. So, I mean, that's just another variable or, thing to think about. But let's move to the third thing for people to consider. And I don't think this is for most people, but just for John, we have an acronym, the FIRE movement, which for me, who hates acronyms, it's financial independence, retire early.
By
And
the way, for the listeners, Randy, you put the acronym in here. I had to ask you to remind me. I'd seen it before, but couldn't remember what it was. Had to ask you to remind me what it was. Randy added the acronym. Thanks, Randy.
for you. You love acronyms, so there you go. I hate them. Um, and Anyway, I think this started out as Silicon Valley primarily, and people that, the concept is that you take your 20s, your 30s, and you live like a pauper. Like you just, you spend as little money as you can. The savings rate is you save instead of 10 to 20% of your income, you save 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, whatever you can. You put it away, you invest it, and then you retire in your 30s or 40 years old. you know, that's another thing. I'm very aware of this in the Bitcoin community. This is
Yes.
very common with Bitcoiners that, I know Bitcoiners that they won't buy socks, they won't buy furniture, they sleep on the floor. I mean, literally, I will hear I had a friend who I think has a lot of Bitcoin, and I don't know, the price something happened, and he goes, I guess I can buy a chair now for my apartment, right? Because it's saving to be able to retire early. Not for everybody, but what are you guys' thoughts on this?
I think it's great if you're in a position to sacrifice, right? And so if you're single, um, this is a could be a conscious decision. It probably came out of Silicon Valley because those guys and gals are working 90 hours a week. They're already sleeping on floors. That's kind of the expectation of that group of so sure, it makes sense. They can, bunk up together, they can sleep under their desks like Elon does and what have you. And it's certainly not a bad way to build a foundation. That's for sure. Now, if you got family, you got kids, I don't think you want them sleeping on the floor or, being unhoused in any way or being transient. So I think it's really one of those seasons of life kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, getting a nest egg, which is an old school term, can relax you. And when you're given an opportunity that may be a little risky, you might be inclined to take that opportunity, as opposed to the safety and security of a paycheck and the K and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean I can see where this would fit someone's lifestyle for sure.
I think it depends if you're making $100,000 a year or $36,000 a year too, right? Like I think there's what opportunities you have, where you're coming from, what you have to do to get future opportunities. And then my guess is that people in the fire movement, they retire in the sense they don't have to work for money, but there doesn't mean they're never going to earn money again. Is my and I think there's a lot of like, gig work or starting businesses or side hustles. My guess is there's a lot of that that goes on, but I think to Anthony's point, like if you, I think there are people this is really cool for.
Yeah. I think 20 stats say 20 to 40% of them return to work anyway, right? Like I can't imagine I would have to have something to do, right? But some people do it because they want to go live in the woods. I have a friend, he didn't make a ton of money, but he worked as a poker dealer. He saved, he saved, he saved. He went and bought this little 100-year-old cabin on the western slope of Colorado, and didn't cost much, doesn't he kind of lives real cheap, and him and his dog, and I don't know, he's married now since then. Like I can't imagine getting a woman to move into that cabin he lives in, but he you know, that works for him. So, to each their own. And by the way, this could go nicely into the die with zero, right? You work for a short period of time and then have longer to enjoy it if that's right for the person. Well, let's talk about something that's made a lot of headlines. Elon Musk and his abundance bomb, right? He made a statement a while back at the Abundance Summit that retirement savings would be quaint and irrelevant. And he went on just to say that money is going to lose its value and that basically everybody will have high income. What I think he didn't make clear is what he means. He doesn't mean UBI. He means that everything because of abundance is going to become so cheap to produce that it will be you'll just be able to get what you want and work will become optional, right? He's really saying AI and robots are going to do everything. And his timeline, where he's thought this out, he thinks artificial general intelligence is going to be somewhere in the next couple of years. Some people argue we're already there. He then thinks by 2030, 2027 to 2030, we will hit artificial superintelligence, which is way, you know, I think that's where an AI is smarter than all the humans on Earth combined or something. And then that will create full abundance by the year 2030. And I know Elon's got a history. He's tends to be very optimistic, sometimes overly optimistic. I know, John, you have some problems with this, but I guess the question we're asking is, what if he's right? We probably should ask what if he's wrong too. I think is not considered. But John, I know you had some pushback on this.
Oh, Anthony, you want to jump in for it? I think it's
don't
really
understand. I don't
interesting.
understand it. I mean, if I think of this as, a basket of goods, supermarket goods, the traditional kind of way you kind of measure, inflation in some ways, so if a basket of groceries today for the average family is, $300 a week. And, in Musk world, it becomes $25 a week. Okay. So let's just use that as an example. It's robots are producing stuff, and you don't need, we solve the fertilizer problem, and we got all kinds of vertical farming going on. So now everything is $25 a week for that same thing. What's the network effects of that? Do wages drop because you don't need it? So your universal high income is now a universal medium income or something. What does it actually mean? What's the what? I don't get it. It doesn't. I can't put the pieces together. So, as I said earlier, help me put the puzzle pieces together here, because I can't.
Look, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Elon Musk in a lot of ways and a lot of things that he's done, and I think highly but I also want to just, like, talk about facts for a second. In 2016, he said we'll have manned missions to Mars by 2024. Like, that's what he said. He said, he was highly confident, uh, in 2020 that we'd be landing humans on Mars by 2026. So I think he's an optimist. He's an entrepreneur, and that's what wires entrepreneurs. I'm not taking that away from him, but I think that when he gives these dates, we have to take that with the data about his predictions in the past. With Doge, he said he was going to cut trillions of dollars, and it didn't happen. So I think there's a level of optimism that just. By the way, he's also trying to sell lots of things with Tesla, sell lots of things with SpaceX, and he's basically saying, don't worry about saving money now, spend it with me today. So it is self-serving in a way that really helps him potentially. So I have a little bit of just skepticism's too strong a word. I just have a little bit of realism that sneaks into my brain about what he's saying.
Yeah,
And so
but John, move away from. Let's assume he's right. I want to assume he's right. What is it? What does it actually mean? That's the puzzle piece I can't get. Yeah, I get that he missed the Mars thing and he changing his mind out. It's the moon, not Mars. I get all that. But what does it mean if, in fact, the price of everything drops to near, the bottom? What else changes in our
I
society?
just don't think he look, I just don't think that politicians can allow that to happen from a GDP as a measurement of their success perspective. And so they'll continue to inflate things in a way that looks different. So I just think that we're not going to have the powers that be. And I'm not trying to be like, a conspiracy theory. I just think that people are going to find ways to inflate and raise prices in other ways. I do think they're going to be cheaper in terms of the real cost of things. So if you were to kind of normalize everything for, fiat currency and do all the normalizations that Randy's, much more interested in than I am, I think there's probably some truth to that. But if you look back at people, even like the patent office in the late 1800s saying that nothing else would ever be invented, and you look at the cost of air travel, and you just walk through all these things. I don't know. I don't think there's going to be this radical deflation in terms of people are going to have. There's always going to be more to be consumed, I think.
Anthony, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but go back to, I don't care if it's JD Rockefeller or it's Cleopatra, like people that were unbelievably wealthy, right? Would you rather live your life today or JD Rockefeller, right? And why is that? And so it's you have air conditioning, he didn't. You have cars, he didn't. You have computers, you got flights, you have all of this technology that you have today. In a lot of ways, you're richer than him, but why is that? Like, what's
That
changed?
to me is the perfect that's the perfect sentiment, Randy. Like I think that's exactly the right framing.
Say some more about that, John, because I'm not following.
I think if I had to choose to be oh, a Caesar in Rome, I think a Caesar in Rome had a harder life than I have. I can gallivant off to Hawaii in a few hours, and I can get over to Europe a few weeks later in a few hours, and I've got some jet lag, and if I want to spend money for business class, then I can lay down flat on that jet, and so when I go out to eat, I mean, I'm like a king, and I don't worry about kind of waterborne diseases, so like I live better than I think most Caesars in Rome, if not all the Caesars in Rome.
Good. I get, yeah, I would agree with all of that, but I still don't understand if, okay, let me try to frame it a different way because and I apologize for being so ignorant that I just can't wrap my head around it. If, you know, there are going to be many, many things that the technology is going to make easier and less expensive to produce. Okay. There, whatever those are, a car that costs $25,000 per vehicle to make now is going to be 5,000, and there's going to be if farming, if robotics really get delivered to the if there's water enough for people to continue to farm in this country and others, the cost of groceries and meat and so forth are going to drop dramatically. I'm trying to understand if you have all that deflationary activity and I don't need as many fiat dollars, or I don't need as many bitcoins to buy those things. What what are the other effects of that? Elon is saying that money won't matter. Everyone will be rich. What does that mean? Does it mean that a person that's making $36,000 a year is on that's all I'm gonna if I'm making $1 million a year, all I'm gonna need is $36,000 and the rest is for me to save? What does it actually mean?
What I don't know. I haven't thought this one all the way through, but what if it meant that the gap between the haves and the have-nots closed and the have-nots had? In other words, organic food was affordable for everybody. And right. And so you're lowering like the number of people in poverty. Like I think that if that's what he's talking about, like I'm really excited about that future.
Let's dig into that example, John. Organic food, there's a great example, right? Because a lot of people can't afford good food. Well, claim is that you will be able to get your own robot that works with AI. Now, we need the chips, we need the power, we need the raw materials, all this stuff. And we've talked about everything from new power plants to orbital power plants to mining the moon and sending it back with a mass driver and all this stuff that's going on. So take all those technologies and bind them together. And I know that's really difficult, right? Because there's those and there's the 10 other technologies that we haven't even thought about that come together. But now you have a robot, Anthony, or lots of people have a robot that goes out in your yard, creates raised bed, plants organic vegetables and fruit, harvests it, washes it, and has it ready for your family to eat. You don't have to go to the grocery store to buy it because you have a robot that, for however many pennies of electricity, is growing it, producing it for you.
That's farcical, frankly. I just don't get it. So tell that to someone living on the Lower East Side of New York City in a 30-story apartment building. How is that going to work? That's not. That isn't.
You put hydroponics in a
Yeah.
corner. Like
Okay.
I don't think I don't think it's impossible. Like I mean that's like
You're
saying
talking
flying
about
cars are impossible.
self-sufficiency. Yeah, some people can become. It would certainly be easier to be more self-sufficient for, again, probably the haves versus the have-nots. But maybe I'm onto something where that quote unquote have-nots, which is a term I just despise, but nonetheless, it's de rigueur, so we'll use it. The people living in the 20 to 80,000 dollar range, if that provides such sufficient resource for them that they can buy anything they want. They could travel anywhere they want to go, and essentially, if you make more than $100,000 a year, it's kind of like money I don't really need because I can do anything I want to do for $100,000 or less. What's the impact of that? The impact of that's going to be, let's make sure everyone has under $100,000 because that's all they need, and you don't need that, so your wages are going to come down.
It,
The hang on, the asset values of the companies that produce those things that enable us to invest that additional dollars, that's going to come down, right? Because they're worth less. They don't, their income is going to be smaller. Their growth is going to be smaller. So what becomes of the stock market? What becomes of, you know, maybe the government will be able to pay off its debt. I don't know.
Well,
Who knows?
you're referencing conversations we've had. We just had a question about the stock market, the Chamath thing that we debated a couple weeks ago. That he's saying it's overvalued. You can't project earnings 25 years out, and in a world of abundance and going down, right? But you know, Anthony, if we go back to 1813 to 1913, while wages and income rose in America because of technology, the cost of living in America got cut in half with fairly limited technology during that 100. So the difference, by the way, in 1913 was when the Fed was created or recreated. But that 100 years when we were on a gold standard, literally everything on average got cut in half. Okay, why? Because we had sound money. And by the way, that's in the middle. We fought a civil war in the middle of that, where we did go off gold for a minute and we printed a bunch of money. And so it would have been even greater without a civil war and all that money printing in the middle. So if we can get to that, now I think the biggest obstacle here is what John said when he talked about the Doge cuts. It wasn't that Elon didn't find fraud. They found a whole bunch of fraud. They just got very, very minimal quote. He underestimated the bureaucracy of the US government. They just wanted to protect the fraud, not get rid of it, because clearly they were benefiting from it, right? So he still has that problem here, to John's point, is politicians are going to fight. But if AI makes everything possible and you can solve all these problems, I don't think they can keep control. I think, and I do think this is part of what we've talked about, the fourth turning. I think a lot of things are coming together here.
I think for me it's like okay if that's true then it's really easy to frame that problem in a non-abundant way where it's very fearful. Or you can look at it and say, where can I find abundance for those my loved ones? And then how can I promote and catalyze abundance for society more broadly? Like those are the questions that and I think it's really easy then to, like, 'cause I think I could take a step into this conversation and be really fearful. And we could fearmonger, which we don't do here, but that we could do that. And so then the question becomes, okay, how do we help people use a lens of abundance with such uncertainty?
All right.
This is not going to go. It's not going to do. We're not going to wake up and 100% of the world's population is going to be in the same place at the same time, right? This is going to be an evolution. So, um, any put Musk's, thing aside, what's the other effects of the imbalance that's going to occur as one society versus another society is further along the path of this efficiency, right? So really what we're talking about is asset efficiency over time. What's the impact of that going to be? And what do people do with that efficiency? Do they use it for good? Do they use it for evil? It's a question that I'm sure academics are wrestling with in think tanks all over the world, because there is going to be a severe imbalance, and some people are going to be left behind. Not everyone's going to reap the benefits of this at the same time. They might eventually, but eventually can span decades.
Well, Sam Altman has, he says massive deflation is coming. A lot of people do. This is his prediction. Is that healthcare is going to drop 45%, education 45%, transportation 30 to 50%. Solar, he points out, has in the last 15 years already dropped 90% and will drop more. And there's multiple banks and like, the data I got here is Citibank, but I've heard this from Bank of America, Chase. I think they're all saying that but we have a real risk of having a deflationary spiral. And that's going to be a painful transition because we'll be 40 trillion in debt maybe by the time this publishes. And paying that back with decreasing tax dollars and decreasing revenue because everything gets cheaper is a whole nother thing that we won't.
Yeah, I think the other thing we have to be careful of is like, what it costs to deliver may go down, but all those companies want to see that profit for their own balance sheet in the stock market. So they're going to see profitability go up. And so I think I'm trying to have a sober view of that so that I don't make bets based on a future that's so optimistic that I'm making careless bets.
Yeah, I don't know, man. That stat that solar's gone down 90%. I know plenty of people, some people on this phone call that have recently had solar panels put on their homes, and the payback is decades without subsidies. So I'm not, what he means by 90%. Maybe the production of solar panels has gone down by 90%, the cost of it, but it's not reaching my house. I'm not going to live long enough to get the payback on a solar panel on a,
Well,
3,500 square foot home.
the price has been dropping. The subsidies have been dropping, right? Like the subsidies used to be really, really high. And as the price has dropped, the subsidies have dropped to now just this year, they're gone, which, I put it on a year ago. There was a 30%, tax credit. I wouldn't have done it without the 30% tax credit. That was a pretty major
Well, you
motivator.
need cooperation from the grid too. You can't sell your excess capacity into the grid. If you can, you're not getting a fair market value for that
Correct.
cost. So,
J-
and that I
just so
don't
you
consider
know,
that a subsidy. I mean, if I built a power plant and wanted to feed the grid, I'd get paid. Well, you've got a power plant in your garage, and you're not allowed to sell that into the grid, which is baloney as far as I'm concerned. So anyway,
so you
we're
you
getting off
can
track.
sell it back to the grid in most places. I think California made it illegal, but I think most places you can. Now, to your point, I pay about 11.6 or 11.8 cents a kilowatt hour here. I have a very complex spreadsheet if you want to see it, figuring this out. So a year ago, I figured out that it worked financially with the 30% rebate. And that's with really low and like there's places in the country where people are paying 3 and 4 times that for some of the East Coast it's 40, 50 cents a kilowatt hour now. I happen to be in a place that's like 11.6. However, when I sell it back to the grid, they give me 6 cents. So roughly half. So to your point,
Wholesale.
that's all why you
That's
have
wholesale.
batteries,
That's fine.
you store it.
Just for Yeah.
So
Anyway,
all
we
right,
got
let's
we got off track. The good news is that renewable energy is still alive and well, and there are lots of reasons to use it, whether it's a data center or a car, or a lot of good uses for it. So we're moving in the right direction.
I think we're going to see new shapes and sizes of opportunity too, like brand new opportunity shapes we've never seen before. And so that's what I'm on the look out for myself, but also to be able to kind of help my children identify that.
all right. Well, we got traditional. That's still one of the options people should consider, right? We got traditional retirement. We have, I'm going to call it John. I'm not going to give Miller credit. It's going to be John's die with zero concept that says
That's not mine.
live
Not
now.
mine.
And just for John again, FIRE, the acronym, says escape fast and save and do that. And then we have the AI abundance that says maybe none of it matters, right?
I'm
Maybe
going to
none of
plug one quick board game here, Randy. The game Cash Flow by Kiyosaki is really a super cool way for people to understand and play with these concepts that I really enjoy playing the game, love playing with my kids. But if you haven't checked out the game Cash Flow as a way of looking at some of these different concepts and how you want to test them out in an hour, hour and a half long game, super fun game to play with the family.
What age groups is that for, John?
I would start probably 12 years old and up,
Okay.
all the way into adulthood.
You know, the real question I think is how much does it take to retire? Has that been redefined? Will it be redefined in the future? Do you want to keep that principle so that you can pass it on? Do you want to die with zero? What is the right thing for you? Maybe the bigger question that we didn't get into much is how to live meaningfully. I think that's part of the die with zero, but how do we bring that's the purpose of money, right? To get the things we want, live meaningfully. And so it's not up to us to tell you what's best for you and your family, but I hope we've given people four different options to think about. So, gentlemen,
Good
I've
job.
enjoyed it.
Let's take a break.
Here are tales of abundance. We know that fitness is just as important as money or milestones. It's one of our key 5 F's. For lots of us, taking care of my body while I build my life is one of the more time consuming and difficult goals to chase. That's why we're partnering with AG1. It's a daily drinkable habit. Less than a minute, that's formulated with 75 plus vitamins and nutrients and designed to support energy, digestion, and immune defense. It even has a few grams of protein that we're all chasing these days. And if you want to try it with our affiliate link, you'll also receive a free AG1 flavor sampler, plus vitamin D3 plus K2 with your welcome kit when you first subscribe, a $72 value. Go to shop.drinkag1.com/tales.
Welcome back for the abundance briefing. Let's start out with Apple. And they just announced their leadership is changing from Tim Cook to John Temis. As we know, Steve Jobs was a CEO and then gone and then back, and Tim Cook has been there for 15 years. Anthony, you wanted to talk about this. What's the question you want to answer? Where do you want to go with this?
Well, the reason I wanted to talk about it is there's a perception that, Tim Cook was, well, he wasn't Steve Jobs. No one ever was, other than Einstein and Henry Ford and people like that, Edwin Land. He wasn't Tim Cook, so he wasn't the original leader. He just was a steward of a big company. And frankly, doing my research, it's a bunch of bull. What he accomplished in his 15 years is pretty freaking amazing. And just give you some things, from a shareholder return perspective, the S&P during his time grew 500%. Apple grew 100%. So a 20x increase in the valuation of the company. And how did he do it? Well, he went to work on the supply chain and operations. That was his strength when he came in. So he did what he had to do in terms of where he was manufacturing, how he was manufacturing, what he was paying for manufacturing, where he was getting his chips, all of that. In 15 years, did anyone have a problem getting an iPhone? Did anyone have a problem getting an Apple product, a laptop, or an iPad, or whatever? Never. You never once heard them say, well, can't seem to get it. Now, today, there's a Mac Mini that they're having, there's so much demand for that they didn't expect, but that's just today. Services. He turned the company into a recurring revenue ecosystem. I mean, he's got, you know, Apple TV, he's got the App Store, he's got the watch, the health, all that stuff. He created the wearable market. There was no real wearable before Cook took over. Now, maybe that was an idea that Jobs had years ago, but you know what? Jobs wasn't there, and he blessed it. He gave the okay to go ahead with it, and we're sitting here today. Most of us have some form of an Apple wearable on our wrist. silicon. He created his own supply chain for his own silicon. You know, the camera on the original phone versus the camera today, tremendous innovation. The only thing that, people will criticize him for was, Siri is a slow adult. And we all know we wish Siri was a little bit better than she is today. And they took a stab at, autonomous vehicles that didn't quite work out the way they wanted to. So no one's perfect, but to call, to poo-poo his accomplishments, um, it's just wrong. So I just wanted to point that out to the listeners that, as you sit there and say, well, where's the new innovation? Well, he took a foundation and made hay with it. Now, what happens next? We don't know. I mean, they didn't spend a lot of capital, and they're not spending a lot of capital on AI. In fact, year over year capital expenditures at Apple are dropping 36%. Investors are saying, well, why aren't you investing? Well, you know, maybe he doesn't want to be on the bleeding edge of that.
Well, hold on. But breaking news, he just basically gave his successor a blank check and said, "We are no longer requiring Apple to return capital in the way we did over the last few years," so that his successor has a lot more flexibility. So all the things you said, yes, I thought you were going to come in this more negative, and I'm so glad you're happy about him. The other things he did really well, succession planning. We will know in 5 or 10 years if succession planning went well, but I think the early indicators are well done, good and faithful servant. Like he returned huge amounts of cash to the shareholder. Now, the one place I think we could really knock him is AI strategy. Apple seems to have fallen behind. Like that's the one place where we really hope the new leader is going to leap forward for Apple's benefit.
Well, for our listeners, hang on. I'm glad you brought that up. So exactly what did he miss? Right. So you could say he didn't build a frontier language model, right? He didn't do that. Okay. What did it cost? And what is it costing those companies to deliver those models? And what's the cash flow impact? We got valuations of 800 billion for ChatGPT on a $30 billion run rate. I don't know that if I was an investor, which I am an investor, as full transparency, a big investor in Apple, that I'd want him doing that. As they used to say, if you can't beat him, eat him. Let the other guys build it out, and I'll just buy it. You know what I mean? And I'll bolt it onto my company, and I'll be fine. So there's a fast follower mentality. You can be an innovator, and you can be a fast follower as well. So we'll see. Like you said, John, 100%. 5 years, we're going to know whether or not whatever strategies they execute are going to pay off. But
When I don't know what the science says today, but when I got my MBA, management and technology was a concentration, and the fast follower beat the first mover ever just slightly more often. So, like if you look at all the data over a couple hundred years, ending in 2006, which is when I did the last research on that, the fast follower was slightly more successful than the first mover for sure.
Since you're both on the fan club, I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm going to argue the other side. I should make it clear, I think he did a fantastic job in a way. And I think what we're talking about here is a preference of style, right? Jobs was the visionary, the creative genius, the innovator. And so now Cook came in. Cook made everything more efficient, more profitable. But his weakness is that vision and that innovation. And they
no.
just
Randy, he grew revenue 8 times. He grew one of the biggest companies in the world 8 times revenue.
What do you
Like, how
want?
do you say that with a straight
Hold on,
face?
hold on. You could have spent 8 minutes talking about this, and now I give one little piece. I haven't even given you a counter yet, and you're arguing despite me
Okay.
giving you the floor. So
Hit us. Go ahead. Do it.
do you think he's a great visionary, like product guide and development? Almost everything.
Yes, and let me tell you why. A visionary knows what not to do as much as he knows what to do. Okay, so he went down the Vision Pro thing when everyone was looking. We want glasses. We want, what it's not AI. It's virtual reality on our face. And there is not a successful virtual reality company other than the people producing the software for it out there. The glasses, Google glasses, everyone remember? Oh, you forget the Google glasses. They went nowhere. The Meta glasses at the time were
Okay.
Facebook glasses.
Okay.
Garbage.
Okay.
Let,
You
let,
guys
let,
have
An-
defended him enough.
let Randy
This
finish.
is getting
Let
ridiculous.
Randy
I don't want
finish.
to
You guys
sound
are
like
on
a
one
fanboy,
thing.
but I also don't want to, throw mud at someone that it's just
You
not true.
you haven't even heard what I've said. So if you look at their sales, over half of their sales are still the iPhone, something he didn't invent, right? The Mac, all these things, like you were talking about wearables. It's 8% of their sales. 8% is what that is. The point is, this isn't, you guys are taking this as an attack, right? I didn't even get into it, but the Jobs was one type of CEO that I think was necessary to get the company to that point. Cook was a different type of CEO that has taken it to a different level. He raised it in a lot of ways beyond Jobs. The downside to focusing on the infrastructure and all the things that you value, Anthony, right? This is your CFO hat, your operations guy. You love that stuff, right? You're like, let's do it, let's make it more efficient. I get it. He's your guy. But Jobs was better at the innovation. I don't think if Jobs was there, Siri wouldn't suck as much as it does. Siri sucks. And by the way, they were pretty much first in AI. I mean, I can create a chatbot now with zero coding experience that's better than Apple's chatbot. Like they are way, like they could have just partnered with somebody, they could have done. And I think what I'm hearing is that Cook even agrees because the guy he's bringing in, John Temis, is a flip back the other way. And it's different styles, and they both have their place. There's very few people that are really excellent at both skill sets. So I think Jobs took him to a place, Cook took him to a place. I think they're stagnating a little bit and they're not innovating. And he's smart enough and wise enough to understand that and turn it over to a guy that's going to innovate more. Now, we'll see if it's right, but to put this in football terms for you, Anthony, what do you see with teams when they have a real disciplinarian coach, right? And the guy that, and then they fire that coach, they inevitably replace them with a quote unquote players coach. And the rules are a little less. And that usually works really well for a while. Then you watch the team gets less disciplined. They win more at first. They then don't win as much. They fire that one and they come back with the disciplinarian.
Yeah.
Is it possible? Is it Randy? Hold on. Is it possible, Randy, that it's not that he's not an innovator, but that he was an innovator for 15 years, and for that 15 years he could see around the corner, and now it's somebody else's turn to see around the corner? Like I think Jobs was an innovator when he was an innovator. I think if you look at innovation, like going from a hardware company innovating into services, he turned Apple Services into a Fortune 40 company all by itself,
Yeah.
$100 billion in revenue. So I think he did innovate. And I also agree with you that he may have lost the thread on the next set of innovations. So I think that's where I have a difference of opinion. I would say that, and maybe it's a distinction without a difference.
Yeah, you're right. But let's and listen. No one's ever going to step on Jobs as innovation. But he did three things. He did the computer slash laptop desktop. He did the uh,
iPhone.
music on the on the
iPod, yeah.
iPod, and he did the phone. That's it. Three things. Now he iterated each of those things. He did not iterate the phone because he didn't have time to, but he iterated the computer to the desktop to the laptop to the video, the graphic design, and so on and so forth. But he didn't produce a new product. And when he did the iPod, he iterated that into more music on a smaller device. And then of course he did the iPhone. So, this idea that he's innovated, he did 1,000 other things. It's not really true. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Well, we're going to give you the last
As I
word.
always say, Randy, I could agree with you, then we'd both be wrong. So I'm going to just leave it at that.
we spent way too much time on this, so I'm going to give you the last word there. We're going to move. We got to move. We got to move to
No, move
another
on.
topic.
Go ahead, move on. I'm good. I'm
All
good.
right.
I was made my argument.
So water. Well, there's water problems all over the world, right? And even look at the western part of the US, California and everything else. Well, guess what? California happens to be on an ocean, and oceans have what, 70 or 80% of the water, something like that in the world. And desalination is a fairly simple technology we've had for decades, maybe a century. We've had it for a long time.
Long
I mean,
time.
the real super simple method, you add electricity to the water and you can take salt water turned into drinking water. That's overly simplified. But there's about 2 billion people that have a water shortage globally. And by the way, if California fixed that problem, they all take from the Colorado River, it would help Arizona, Nevada, except wherever that thing flows, as well. So uh, basically, I mean, the story is that, oh, by the way, I said 70, 80, 97% of the Earth's water is in oceans. And if we have cheap enough energy, this goes back to our solar discussion from earlier. If there's enough cheap energy, whether it's solar, fusion, nuclear that's making a comeback, that it now becomes fairly cheap to turn that into drinkable water. Thoughts, gentlemen?
Yeah, there's a trade-off, and this is where California is stubbing its toe. There is a trade-off, and the trade-off is the ecological impact that desalination has to the ocean. You know, there is a devastating effect when they return the salt water to the ocean. It's so salty that it creates dead zones, and so also when they're pulling the water in, they're taking in fish and they're taking in crabs and other wildlife, if you will, plankton and what have you, that's having an impact on the ecosystem. So that's the trade-off. I would argue that that trade-off is well worth it when you consider how short we are on water. You know, I think it's worldwide, 70% of the water usage is used in agriculture. If the people in Arizona are on, you know, the cost of their water is very, very high. So making that trade-off is, to me, well worth it. There are some new technologies in desalination where they go underground into the sand and they pull the water out that way. There's diffusion technology that diffuses the salt water when it goes back, so it doesn't have the same ecological impact. That costs money. But if energy costs go down, they can invest in those other technologies, and we can be in a good shape. The Middle East, pretty much gets all its water from desalination. And that's one of the big issues with the events that are going on right now. Some of those plants were hit during the conflict. So all for it, makes all the sense in the world. This is one we got to figure out, because we're going to need that water. We are running out. We can't rely on the snowfall uh, to get it done. It's just not working.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew more about the topic. I think at the end of the day, I have questions like, where does the salt go? And, there was an old, like, I would say it's a B flick from the 80s, but it's probably a C flick called The Ice Pirates, where it's all about like the water conflict. I haven't seen the movie in 40 years. It probably doesn't hold up. But, it's like this has been a thing, desalinization's been around for 5,000 years in some way, shape, or form. And so now it's like, how do we handle, like, what do we do with all the salt? I think
Well,
that's going to be a question. We've got to, but to Anthony's point, I think it's something we have to figure out.
yeah.
And by the way, my first thought is that if I have a desalination plant and I have all this excess salt, then I now have a salt business as well. But maybe there's something. I just asked
Well,
Gemini.
it's an impure. They don't use the salt, guys, because it's impure. They would have to go through a purification process in order to do that. It may not be economically viable to do it. But California just shut down a project in somewhere near San Francisco or north of San Francisco. Newsom shut down a desalination plant for exactly the reasons I said. No thought giving to what's the alternative, what's the way around it. Once again, the government jumping in the middle of something and destroying abundance. I mean, who needs water more than California for its agriculture? I mean, the numbers for various types of trees, like I think it's almonds, consume some ungodly amount of water per pound of product. It's just incredible compared to other crops. So yeah, we need to get off our butts and make this happen, because we will have no abundance if we run out of water.
So I looked it up while you were talking, and you can take that salt and use it to create table salt, but it costs more than it does just to mine it.
Right.
It's still not economical at this point. Although it does say that it's actually used a lot for pharmaceuticals and specialty food, which I just didn't do enough research to dig into that. Yeah. Anyway, we can put a bow on this thing. I just think it's interesting. You know, technology is helping us solve problems. As Anthony said, the desalination technology is getting cheaper and the electricity is getting cheaper. So this is only going to become more and more viable, uh, you know, as we grow. So everyone, thank you. You made it to the end. You like us, download, subscribe, tell your friends. It's that little button. It's a thumbs up or a star or whatever's on your podcast player. Hit that thing. Follow us. It helps the algorithm, helps everyone. Gentlemen, I enjoy it, even if you both are the biggest Tim Cook fans I've ever seen. I didn't know they existed. So there you go.
Go get on your Android. Try to text me on your Android.
Works just fine. So it's all right. All right. I'm in the cult of Google, not the cult of Apple. That's about it. Either way. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Let's talk soon.
Listen and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Click follow for more content like this, or go to talesofabundance.com to join our community and get free tools.